Hello, this is Palicopad and welcome to something a little different for the channel. As you may or may not be aware, I am a huge zombie fan. I originally started up my channel back in 2012 when the DayZ mod was still widely popular and not the strung out shit show it is at the moment. I still hold out hope that the game will become what it set out to be when the alpha to the full game dropped at the end of 2013. 2013? And it's still in early access? Anyway, from many depths in my Project Zomboid series to making my girlfriend go around the corner first to confront the witch in Left 4 Dead 2, I have been fortunate enough to be able to experience a lot of what is on offer to the average PC gamer when it comes to tooling up to fight the Horde. But this love started way before I discovered all the diverse ways I could try and survive the undead apocalypse digitally, so I've decided for my Halloween special this year I would list my top 10 zombie films of all time. Now, my hope here is that I'll be able to list a few films that you haven't seen, maybe even never heard of, and this will inspire you to go out and hunt these films down and watch them for yourself. But in advance of this, I want to iterate that this is a list of my favourite films. This is in no way a definitive best of video, as there are films I've left off here which are amazing zombie flicks from a cinematic perspective, but sometimes it's the slightly less well known ones which steal your heart. So with that being said, let's start by naming some films I love but I can't include in this list for a certain reason. And I better put up a mild spoiler alert here just to cover my ass. 28 Days Later. Danny Boyle's innovative film shook up the undead genre by having not slow, lumbering ghouls like in many other films, and instead made them fast, aggressive and unyielding. In other words, absolutely bloody terrifying. This was solidified by the fact that it was set in the UK, and being a Brit myself, it was a welcome change to have this based in my home country with surroundings I could relate to far easier than the grid-like cities and vast open plains of the USA. That alone pulled me into this adrenaline-fueled 113-minute romp from start to finish. Sadly, this doesn't fall into my top 10 because technically these are infected, not undead. This is proven by the end of the film when the survivors are waiting for the infected to starve to death. If they were zombies, then they wouldn't be able to starve to death because, you know, they're already dead. But speaking of viruses, this leads me on to the next film not in my official top 10, but in itself is a great film. World War Z. I was really looking forward to an adaptation of Max Brooks' follow-up book to the Zombie Survival Guide, detailing the events leading up to, during and after a zombie plague has infected the world. Sadly though, the film we received is nothing like the novel it's based upon, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad film in itself. One of the aspects that I enjoy with this film, and one I think rarely gets the attention it deserves, is the initial outbreak of a zombie plague, and this in my opinion is captured wonderfully. The initial confusion and panic with the breakdown of modern civilization before your very eyes in the first 30 minutes is a sight to behold. That's not to say that the rest of the film isn't worth sitting through. It's just a shame that a perfectly good plot from Max Brooks was tossed aside purely so the title could be used to headline a different film altogether. Demons. Demons, as the title implies, is about demons. It starts out with a mysterious guy giving away tickets to a film premiere at a newly opened cinema about a bunch of kids who come across the grave of Nostradamus, and here they discover a metal mask which cuts one of the teenagers' face, who then transforms into a demon, who then hunts down the rest of the group. Coincidentally, the mask prop from the film is exhibited in the cinema foyer, and when one of the patrons tries it on, they also cut their face, and guess what happens next? After her transformation into a demon, the remainder of the audience try to flee the cinema but find themselves locked in, which leads to a desperate fight for survival. The reason I mention this film is because although the people who turn are referred to as demons, it appears the possession is something which is transferred to the victim by a cut or laceration, much like a zombie bite or scratch is the beginning of the end for that victim. I'm also captivated by the feeling of isolation and entrapment that the film conveys. If you ever get the chance to view this film, I highly recommend it. Now for a few honourable mentions. These are films that fill my quota for being a good zombie film, but when you are limiting yourself to 10 in the list, you have to cut the line somewhere. So, starting with Night of the Living Dead. What list of zombie movies can ever be taken seriously if the granddaddy of the whole genre isn't mentioned at least in passing? This is the first movie to show zombies in their modern undead form. Films beforehand showcased zombies in their traditional voodoo style, that being a person under a spell from a witch doctor or such folk, but Romero reinvented them as walking corpses, as he believed the scariest monsters imaginable were humans themselves. This is portrayed through all of his films, where the zombies, although a constant threat, play second fiddle to the horrors that the human race put upon themselves. But that's enough waxing lyrical about the inner meanings of the original Romero trilogy. This is a fantastic zombie film which just so happened to originate the genre and inspire thousands of spin-offs and imitators, but one which is far too obvious to include in my top 10. Wasted Away, or Zombies! Out of the many zombie films I've had the pleasure and displeasure to sit through, there are times when the classic premise of the genre can get a little bit stale. And then, every so often, if your heart is pure and the wind is blowing in the right direction, you may come across a film which hits you like a breath of fresh air. Wasted Away, or Zombies, is one of those films for me. It is by no means a classic by any stretch of the imagination, but it initially kept me watching all the way to the end and has me revisiting it every couple of years. Which may not sound like an out-and-out recommendation, but any film I'm willing to rewatch, especially in the zombie genre, can be counted as a triumph in my books. Wasted Away is a film from the zombie perspective, except the zombies don't think they're zombies. The majority of the flick is in colour, but when viewing the perspective of anyone but the zombies own, the film shifts to a 1950s black and white B-movie style, which makes the different viewpoints very easy to distinguish between. It's not a great film, but it's a film I enjoy viewing for its comedic shot at putting a spin on what can be a tired formula. A Cadaver Christmas. A Cadaver Christmas is a guilty pleasure of mine. So much so, in fact, I've managed to wrangle it onto our official Christmas film playlist, along with the National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Elf and Die Hard amongst others. The premise is a simple zombie fair based around the festive holidays, where a janitor is cleaning up the science department of a local college at Christmas and discovers that the dead are being brought back to life. After dealing with the initial threat and having no luck trying to raise the police through the college switchboard due to an overzealous student security guard, the janitor decides to track down a local officer so they can deal with it. Sadly, the police officer at hand has his own set of problems at the local bar, and this all leads us down the path of the janitor, the police officer, his prisoner, a happy drunk with suicidal tendencies, the bartender and the student security guard dealing with the horrors that lurk within the college science department and beyond. I won't lie, this is a bad movie, with nothing original to say and cliches aplenty, but it just hits a note of silliness with over-the-top gore and a smidge of Christmas spirit, which encapsulates me enough to revisit it year on year. Taste is subjective, and that's why this one gets an honourable mention, because I love it. So with those out of the way, it's time to jump into my top 10 zombie films of all time. Last of the Living. Over the years, there have been a lot of good low-budget horror features hailing from New Zealand. Last of the Living is not one of them. The generic plotline has three friends hanging out in vacant houses around their hometown after a zombie apocalypse, generally dicking about and having a great time, until a beautiful scientist comes along with claims of being able to cure the undead of their ailments, but only if she can get to the local hospital lab. And of course, because she's the only woman around, all three have to have a crack at wooing what could possibly be the last woman on Earth. The characters are fairly stereotypical and tick all the necessary boxes for characters you'd expect in this scenario. The domineering, slightly stupid alpha male, the quieter, more intelligent beta male, and the completely batshit crazy omega male. And although you can see the ending from a mile away, the sudden turn of mood towards the end of the film is a nod to some of the classic films it so obviously takes its inspiration from. So, why number 10 on my list? It's the premise of the film that I love. Running amok around your hometown when the world has gone belly up with your mates and living in the more upmarket homes you can only wish about living in, if only for a few days before moving on, is the zombie apocalypse dream scenario. Yes, Dawn of the Dead takes this concept and runs away with it, but from a practical point of view, this is your real life outlook as a single male hanging out with friends in the end of the world. And it's that vision that I love, even when it eventually all goes tits up. Detention of the Dead. What happens when you take one of the most influential 80s teen movies and throw a shed load of zombies at it? Detention of the Dead. It's predominantly a zombie-filled homage to that Brat Pack classic The Breakfast Club, with many a subtle nod to other horror films and actors. The Savini Library, anyone? The main casts managed to cover all the main cliques you tend to find in your average high school, and once incarcerated inside said library, along with another kid who looks mightily unwell, the scene is set for a very tongue-in-cheek adventure. This film is very aware of the audience it assumes will watch it, and so houses a lot of referential humour and character tropes expected from a director who loves both horror and classic teen movies, and has decided they would work very nicely together. Simply put, if John Hughes and George Romero made a movie together, Detention of the Dead would be it. The reason I'm not really outlining the plot any more than I have is because if you're a fan of either genre, you pretty much know what is going to happen already. And again, this doesn't make it a bad film. The reason this one is in my top 10 is because it knows exactly who its demographic is. It doesn't try to be original, it doesn't try to force a social commentary over the characters the film follows. All it wants to do is entertain you for its 87-minute runtime, with as many nods to the pop culture from the 80s to the late noughties and zombie fiction as it can stuff in. And the soundtrack isn't that bad too. Dead Alive! Dead Alive is the second horror film from the acclaimed director Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame, and it is a prime example on how to make a fun, over-the-top horror comedy on a modest budget of a reported $3 million. Dead Alive is set in the late 1950s in Wellington, New Zealand, as we accompany Lionel Cosgrove on a quest to woo the shopkeeper's daughter with whom he is supposedly destined to be with. The problem is Lionel's mother, Vera, an overbearing, cruel lady who blames her husband's death on her son and wants to keep him all to herself. So when on a date with his new lady friend, she follows them both to the zoo to snoop on what they could be up to, and it is here where she is attacked and bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey. And from that brief introduction to the film, you can see the sort of movie you are going to be subjected to. Of course, it all gets out of hand rather quickly, leading to some legendarily gruesome and funny scenes involving puss-top soup, kung fu priests, and several creepy but hilarious scenes involving an undead baby. If you're watching this video, I'm 99% sure you've seen this film, or at the very least have heard about it, and if you haven't, I implore you to see it as soon as you can. Even so, Dead Alive is a ludicrous masterpiece. Shaun of the Dead! Shaun of the Dead. There are several reasons why I absolutely love this film. Firstly, it's set in the UK and it deals with very British problems in a zombie apocalypse with very British solutions. It also has an abundance of nods to other films in the genre, and it is one of the few films in my opinion which gets the balance of horror and humour spot on. The cast also has a rapport with one another which perpetuates onto the screen, making most of the dialogue in scenes feel natural and off the cuff. Shaun of the Dead has the lead character being dumped by his girlfriend who is sick of his uniform lifestyle on the eve of a zombie apocalypse, but once he and his best friend manage to grasp the severity of their situation, Shaun makes it his mission to rescue the love of his life and take her to the safest place possible, their local boozer, the Winchester. This could be titled a very British zombie apocalypse, and I don't think it would lose any of its luster without the punny name, and that's why it has a special place in my heart. For all the fantasies we have about living through the end times within a mall where everything is up for grabs, this film right here would be the reality for me. And I know all the films, books and games I've ingested throughout my life, which has given me all the essential tips and sensible advice on how to survive the end times, mean nothing because I'm sure this is how my story would play out. Because this is human nature captured on film. Yes, you know it's safer to head out of the city, foregoing any responsibility you may think you have to friends and family for the sake of survival, but there's no safer place than home. Or the pub. Rambok. Rambok, or Berlin Undead, or as it was named when I came across it, Siege of the Dead, is barely a feature-length picture running in at about 63 minutes, but what it does in that time has remained with me since that first viewing. The film starts with the lead character Michael arriving outside his ex-girlfriend's flat, hoping to reconcile with her just as a virus has started to grip the city of Berlin, which turns anyone bitten into a very aggressive zombie if that person gets too worked up. Soon Michael realises that his ex isn't home, but an apprentice plumber working on the same floor teams up with him, and together they have to figure out a way to secure the apartment, and then plan a way to escape in order to track down his love. The unique plot point here though is that a bite in itself isn't fatal. All it means is that person is infected. In order to surrender to the virus, one must have to have an adrenaline rush, which in the middle of a zombie breakout is easy enough to succumb to, but it's an original twist on the transmission of the sickness. and, like 28 Days Later, having fast zombies in confined spaces is absolutely bloody terrifying. So far my list has featured a lot of films which could be classified as horror comedy or light-hearted horror at the very least, but this one has no buoyancy whatsoever. This is a hopeless film, and it is set out right from pretty much the first scene. The ending in itself does hold a certain beauty to it, where all parties involved get what they want, although it is by no means a happy outcome, but the perfect way to end what turns out to be a harrowing piece of German zombie cinema for all the right reasons. Return of the Living Dead! From one of my more serious entries on this list to without a doubt the silliest, Return of the Living Dead is a proficient parody of all the cheap zombie motion pictures to riff off Romero's classics. It takes the idea of the flesh-eating ghoul, gives it a healthy dose of absurdity, or the trauma treatment if you will, and then unleashes it onto a group of punks, warehouse workers, morticians and police force for your viewing pleasure. In a quick summary, two bumbling warehouse storesmen manage to release a deadly gas from a sealed drum which causes the dead to rise from the grave, quite literally at times, and go on the search for brains. Not any flesh or parts of the body, just brains. And as you may have guessed, chaos ensues. And these zombies aren't your average shamblers either. They can run, jump and even speak very basic sentences, which again showcases the very tongue-in-cheek attitude of the film throughout. This movie, for whatever reason, barely features on any movie channel or streaming service, and if it wasn't for a chance viewing on a random satellite station, I still probably wouldn't have seen it. But I instantly treasured this movie to the point where I managed to wrangle a pristine 20th anniversary edition DVD for quite a bit of money, and I've never regretted that decision at all. A gem of a zombie film, although very much of its time in looks and attitude, but I think that just adds to the charm. Grab a big bowl of popcorn and get ready to laugh and gawk at this 80s classic. The Battery. I can safely say that The Battery is the only film in this list where I had the pleasure of watching with no pre-apprehension. I could just enjoy it for what it was from start to finish. If there was ever a film which epitomises the concept of the game DayZ, The Battery would be it. That's to say, not a lot happens for a large majority of the film, other than witnessing two teammates of a baseball squad walking around the back roads of New England with beautiful vistas as their backdrop and only each other and their consciences to address regularly. And like DayZ, it all comes to a head when the duo have an uneasy meeting with another couple of survivors while scavenging out on the open road. This isn't the end of the story at this point, but I will hold off from any more details due to wanting to give you the opportunity to experience this film, if you choose to, with as open a mind as possible. Although you get the feeling neither of the two guys were particularly close to one another before the world went tits up, by the end of the film you can see that they are firm friends, which makes the ending all the more devastating. When I see a low budget movie starring the writer who also happens to direct the thing too, my eyes tend to do a roll to the back of my skull, as this is generally a sign of an amateurist job. But considering this was made on a minuscule fund of $6,000, this is another masterclass in how to make a low budget zombie film. If you don't mind slow paced motion pictures which focus less on the visceral details of surviving a zombie outbreak and more on the intricate day-to-day living, then this is worth a watch. Diary of the Dead. You're probably surprised to see what is generally referred to as one of George Romero's weaker installments of the Dead series so high in this list, but there's a couple of reasons why I prefer this one over more popular films like Day of the Dead. Diary of the Dead, being a Romero movie, is a social satire from the time it was produced, and in 2007 it was the effect of the mass media and the fast growing social media's role of distributing news to the masses. But the main reason I love this film is far more shallow. As I've said previously, one aspect of any of the possible zombie apocalypses which get brought to screen that often gets overlooked is the initial outbreak, and it is refreshing to see a film where the characters are away from their hometowns and having to deal with the beginning of the end of the world while stuck in the back end of nowhere. Without instant access to the news or global events, which we all take for granted these days, you soon feel the claustrophobia that the characters are feeling, knowing something really big is happening but being not quite sure what due to conflicting reports. Like Night of the Living Dead, Diary of the Dead is set right around the beginning of the outbreak, and it could be argued that this is a more modern take on Romero's original story. I'm also a sucker for found footage films like Cloverfield and the Blair Witch Project, so having the main characters document their entire journey was an interesting direction for George to take after Land of the Dead, and yet another reason why I'm so fond of this movie. Zombieland. Rules. Everybody needs rules. And it's these rules which get introduced to us right at the start of the film by Columbus. a World of Warcraft playing introvert who arguably hadn't lived a day of his life before the zombie apocalypse happened. It soon becomes apparent that it's these rules that have kept him alive for as long as they have, when far more capable people have fallen by the wayside before him due to lack of preparation or understanding of the undead problem at hand. But it's also these rules which restrict him from embracing the new world he has found himself in and feeling truly free, which is where a guy called Tallahassee comes in. I feel to say any more about the story at this point is a waste of all our time, since this movie was a massive worldwide hit with many an A-list actor portraying the lead characters and a legendary cameo from Bill Murray thrown in for good measure. It's just a fun film. Yes, I could blabber on about how this is a film about growth and acceptance, but all you really remember is Woody Harrelson playing the Deliverance dueling banjos intro on a banjo before using said banjo to cave a zombie's head in. It isn't a clever movie in itself, it offers no new ideas to the genre or reflect any social narrative back at you to contemplate after the credits have rolled, but I had a massive Cheshire Cat grin on my face when leaving the cinema after viewing it for the first time and every subsequent time after. Does this view of the movie reflect badly on me? The fact I can have such a brainless, unoriginal movie with a lot of heart as my number 2, when there are films from a cinematic perspective that are far more deserving which haven't even made the cut onto this list in the first place? Probably, but I really enjoyed this, and that's why it's so near the top. A guilty pleasure, yes, but a pleasure nonetheless. And finally, Dawn of the Dead. Yep, I'm sure you all saw this coming. But as a Cadaver Christmas has made our Yuletide film playlist, the original Dawn of the Dead is watched every Halloween in the Patch household. This film is virtually perfect in my eyes and ticks all the boxes of what I like to see in a zombie movie. Following on directly from Night of the Living Dead, Dawn starts off with you witnessing the breakdown of society, followed swiftly by the discovery and eventual fortification of a whole bloody shopping mall, before a biker gang comes in and ruins everyone's day, including their own, before, as is traditional with Romero's works, a suitably open ending is left for the viewer to ponder what will happen to the survivors that we have grown close to over the course of the film. I could at this point discuss the look at materialism of the modern day America within this movie, but it is a well trodden path when discussing the intricacies of Dawn of the Dead, and not what I'm going to bore you with here. As I stated earlier, this is a list of films I enjoy repeated views of, and although I'm sure George Romero was making a valid point when it came to his perspective of American consumerism, I just came to see zombies in a mall, man. It annoys me that once again I have very little to say anything about my favourite zombie movie ever, but there is nothing I can add here that hasn't been said before 10 times over. This isn't a film I need to justify in having a great affection for, as the cultural influence Dawn has had on the world is still apparent. Well, there you have it, my top 10 zombie movies with plenty of honourable mentions to boot. My wish when I originally decided to do this list was that hopefully you would check out a couple of the films that maybe you hadn't heard of, or even give some of the ones which you haven't seen in a while a rewatch. It is Halloween after all. And as always, thank you for watching, a like is always appreciated, and I'll talk to you again soon. Take it easy.